My name is Lamia Debussy. I'm Director of Engagement here at the MCA. And I'd like to begin today by bringing our attention to the place we're gathered, here on Talawalada, on the shores of Warrain, to acknowledge the Gadigal people, the traditional and ongoing custodians of these lands and waters, the storytellers and art makers for over 65,000 years. I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and extend my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and First Nations guests in attendance here today. So this will be a very exciting exchange between Julie and Suzanne. But before I make my introductions, it's important for us to take a moment to thank the generous supporters and patrons and partners who've made this exhibition possible. Julie's studio, and in particular Sarah Rents, Julie's studio manager. Strategic sponsor Destination New South Wales, through their support of the Sydney International Arts Series, our major partner Telstra, and our media partner, The Guardian. We gratefully acknowledge the support of principal patrons, exhibition patrons, Laura Ariaga Andreessen and Mark Andreessen, and Lorraine Tarabay and Nick Langley, and major exhibition partners White Cube and Grant Perry Private. We can't do things like this without supporters like that, and so thank you for helping us bring this exhibition and this event to life. We're going to kick off soon for the discussion. I'm just going to let you know there will be some time for questions from the audience towards the end, so get your thinking caps on, and at the right time, MCA staff will magically appear with microphones for when you put your hand up. Some more people come to the back, it's great. If you haven't already, once this event is finished, I encourage you all to visit the exhibition on level 3, and our MCA Cafe at Talawalada will stay open till 9 p.m. as well. So, to do some introductions. You may think they need no introduction, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. Julie Mehretu is one of the most influential contemporary artists working today. We've been saying that for the last 3 days, haven't we? She keeps shaking her head every time we do it. Currently living and working in New York, she's exhibited extensively internationally at major institutions across the US, the UK and Europe since the 90s, including a recent major solo exhibition at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York and at Los Angeles County Museum of Art. She's also the subject of a current exhibition, Julie Mehretu Ensemble, currently on show at the Palazzo Grassi Pinot Collection in Venice. And the Transcore of the Radical Imaginatory is her first exhibition in Australia, and we feel very lucky to have it. Mehretu has undertaken significant commissions of monumental scale, including the very recently unveiled 83 feet high installation in Chicago's Obama Presidential Center. You may have read about it recently. If you haven't looked it up, do. It's incredible. In 2005, Mehretu was the recipient of the MacArthur Fellows Award and the American Art Award from the Whitney Museum of American Art. In 2015, she was awarded the US Department of State Medals Arts Award, and in 2020, she was named by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the arts, which is incredible. Suzanne Cotter is a leading curator and scholar of international contemporary art, and of course is the director of the MCA. She's been director of the Museum of Modern Art in Luxembourg, Mudam, and the Serravesh Museum of Contemporary Art in Porto in Portugal. Previous curatorial positions include Senior Curator for the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi Project, Deputy Director and Senior Curator of Modern Art in Oxford, Exhibitions Curator at the Hayward Gallery in London, Curator at the Whitechapel Art Gallery in London. She's currently a board member of the International Committee for Modern and Contemporary Art Museums and chair of its Museums and Sustainability Committee, and a member of the Selection Committee for the Biennale of Sydney. I said they could do without an introduction, I did one anyway, but please join me in welcoming Julie Mehretu and Suzanne Cotter.
Thank you, Lamia. Hello, everyone. Great to see you all here. What an honour it is, indeed, to be here with the incredible artist Julie Mehretu, whose beautiful exhibition we have opened this week. And I hope many of you in the room have had a chance to see the exhibition, and I hope those of you who haven't will see it this evening and that you will return many times over. I myself just had the opportunity to walk through it with some fresh eyes with one of the lenders to the exhibition, and I was discovering so many new things with these paintings and incredible works on paper as I walked through. So by way of introduction, and Lamia has already provided a lovely sort of introduction into who Julie is, I'd like to just add a little bit to that. Born in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia in 1970, Julie left her country of birth for the US with her family in 1977 to escape the Red Terror of the Mengistu Revolution. Her life journey from Ethiopia to becoming a renowned artist is a testament to the transformative power of art and a deep connection between personal history and creative expression. As well as the many awards and honours and accolades that Julie has received, her work has been the subject of exhibitions around the world, and since the late 1990s. Julie has participated in just about every major international biennale, from Venice to Documenta in Kassel, and her works can be found in pretty much every major museum collection around the globe. Her 2019 US retrospective at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and which traveled to the Whitney Museum of American Art in 2021, led to the New York Times acknowledging her as one of America's greatest living painters. Among Julie's many commissions and permanently cited works are Mural, created for the Goldman Sachs headquarters in downtown New York in 2010, or it was inaugurated in 2010. It took several years to make. And her monumental diptych, Powel, Eon 1 and 2, for San Francisco Museum of Modern Art in 2018 for their new wing. As Lamia mentioned, this year saw the announcement of Julie's commission for the Obama Presidential Center in Chicago, which will open in 2025, and the commissioned work, a monumental painted and stained glass work of some 25 meters high by 8 meters wide, has already been installed because it constitutes part of the physical fabric of the new building and presidential center. Julie, as well as all of this, Julie is also one of the founders, with Paul Pfeiffer and Lawrence Chua, of Denniston Hill, a residency program for artists and creative visionaries, which is nestled in a landscape in upstate New York in a place known as the Southern Catskill Mountains. So, Julie, to begin, to hear from you. So let's start with the exhibition that we've opened, Julie Mehretu, The Transcore of the Radical Imaginatory. We worked really closely on the selection for the exhibition, and from the outset, we decided that we were not going to do a retrospective or attempt to do a retrospective. You'd only recently completed your major retrospective exhibition in the US. We had worked together on a survey exhibition that was retrospective in its arc for the Serralves Museum in Porto in 2017 that traveled to the Botín Foundation in Santander. And I think you were excited about the idea of just thinking about now, but that now has a span, a time span, and that time span in terms of the paintings is from 2018 to the present. And then conscious of this being your very first exhibition here in this country, and that your work may not be well known to many people in Australia and the broader public, that we would look to offer a sort of a retrospective view to your work through your drawings, prints, and works on paper. So what is it like for you? You've seen the drawings and prints, and well, we have new prints we'll talk about in a little while, and the drawings, of course, before, and many of them have been included in other retrospective exhibitions. But what's it like for you to see all of these paintings created over this incredibly fertile period of time for you, presented together here in the exhibition?
It's actually amazing and wonderful, and it's so wonderful to be here. And I just want to first thank all of you for coming out on a rainy afternoon and being here. I think we all put so much into making these things happen, and I think it's really amazing when you have the kind of engagement and desire to show up like this. So I really appreciate it. I think for me, seeing all these paintings here for the last 6 years, you know, when you first talked to me about this exhibition, one of the things artists, I think what we love is these moments to really learn something else, right? And by doing exhibitions, there's a process of making the work, and then there's a process of putting it together. And they're always so instructive. And so when you, having done the survey in the US and having just finished that, and then working on the ensemble show, which I had already just started working on when we first talked about this show, the show that's at the Pinot Foundation in Venice, that's the different approach for that show was to not show things chronologically, even though it did have this kind of work from earlier periods of time, not necessarily, not in the same way as a survey, but it did. But what was really instructive about that was being able to bring guests and bring my friends into the show and curate these conversations. And so you had these conversations between not just my paintings from the past and with each other, but also with these other artists. And then for this one, and that was an instructive way to do something, because then I had to really think about why and what those relationships mean. And then with this show, I think what's really interesting is to think of, like, you just mentioned Howell and Eon for the SF MoMA, and those paintings are about 35 feet wide and 20-something, 28 feet tall. So they're huge. But working on them, I got into this very different space of working, and it was after that I almost stopped working with ink, but I started doing these much larger gestural things in the paintings, and I think that it was working on the two paintings for San Francisco that really released that. And they were installed in 18, and this work, the two of which you have here, are from 18 till now. So it's interesting to see that. Also, those paintings, I began them, and how I began right at the beginning of the last Trump administration. The first day I started working on that was the day we realized we lost the election. And it's so, I mean, right now, just before having left the US, that was the same. Even this time, it was a little worse. The devastation we felt, like and the somberness you felt in the streets. It was again a beautiful sunny autumn day in New York, and and I was just remembering that before being so relieved to get out of the country and be here. And I think these paintings. It's interesting that this show is opening at the precipice of this next administration, where we really know what we're going to get into. I mean, we know that it's going to be devastating. And I think there's something about where I had to go in making that was where, in the early Obama years, where things felt like we were pushing these other new boundaries, new things were changing. But the Trump years is when I really got into these very brightly colored paintings. It's kind of weird. And it was from these blurred photographs that the colors come from, but there's this push through of this desire and insistence on what is radically possible and how we have to maintain that possibility. And I think we're back in that moment. So it's an interesting cycle, right? I guess from the beginning of that into this moment. And the last two paintings that I made for the show, one of them you see from right at the beginning of the show with some of the earlier paintings from in the midst of the pandemic. So I guess it's just a really interesting kind of observation that all of that is, we're back in this cyclical space of that, of that, the dawn of that, about the space of half an hour before the seventh seal opens, and all hell is let loose.
Well, actually, that was going to be my next question, was about the space of half an hour. But, the fact that when, for example, this exhibition is anchored by a number of important cycles of paintings made over these past years, including about the space of half an hour. So we're presenting 3 paintings from a cycle of 7 that were actually created, that you began just before the COVID pandemic began, and then during, and you mentioned this idea of the threshold states. But could you talk a little bit about, well, I'd like you to talk a little bit about them and what was going through your mind as you were making them, because you also moved away from painting with the brush. You were talking earlier about the impact of the commission for SF MoMA on your way of making paintings and the kind of permission that gave you, perhaps. And it would seem that that particular moment, it was a particular historic moment, a political moment, impacted also how you approach those paintings.
What was the first part of the question? I'm sorry, I was listening.
To talk about the idea of threshold states. And
Yeah. That's right. So yeah, that was a very, we were, the whole world, we were so angry, right, that we had to go through this, that we were experiencing this global pandemic that could have been managed in such a different way, and maybe we didn't even need to get to the global kind of quarantine that we had to go into, in this kind of shelter-in-place situation. I hate the word lockdown, because I know so many people who've really experienced real and true in-prison lockdown. So that wasn't what we were under, but we were definitely quarantining and staying in place. And and for me, I think the anger around that happening, I just remember when I realized it wasn't going to be just a few days or a week, and being so mad, and really mad at Trump. And then and had started these paintings, and these paintings are all blurred images of the photographs that are under them of places where either they were places where refugees were being imprisoned, or where or places like the Libyan refugee shelter that was bombed, or kind of other spaces of that sort. We had prison minors in the United States, refugee minors, and so you had this kind of reality, and it's, you had it here in Australia, you had it in the United States, you had it and have it in Europe, not just on the North African border, but also, but really I guess mostly in the North African border, but you have those camps also in Southern Europe, or the Mediterranean part. And I think, like, for me, I think I was looking at this other issue and was interested in that, but then this condition shut us all down, and no one could really, there was the kind of space of movement we were all in these local places, and moving was happening through this ontological space or through the web. And I was really, I don't know, I was in this space in the studio upstate working. We were there, the family, Jess and the children, and we each had our days working on our own. And I think those paintings really were coming before the next election, and knowing that we were in that place. We were in an election year, and it was really paramount to try and win that election and insist on this other thing. So I don't know, somehow it was, those paintings become kind of internal x-rays of a time. And, what the actual photograph is not so material, because the ghosts and the haunting that exist in the photograph, they come, they're palpable, they're present. But it's as a cycle, how the paint works across them and what happened, I think that was really unleashed from the quarantine and pandemic. And there's this, they're fraught in a way, but there's this movement through them, and there's this flickering kind of something else that exists. And you see,
it's a sense of light in
yeah,
too.
Yeah, light, and dance. Like, there's almost the sense of someone kind of like not a seance, but when you really move to like conjure something else. And that's, I feel like the presence of those kinds of beings are in those paintings, and they dance through them and they move through them. Yeah. And then the title comes from the book of Revelations, for those of you who don't know. Every seal that's opened is, this is the seventh seal. And he goes, there was silence for about the space of half an hour before the seventh seal was opened, and all four horsemen of the apocalypse are let loose on earth. And so those that don't know that story, that's where the title comes from. But the reason I titled the paintings after I made them, and it was actually a title that came to me through Tacita Dean. We were really, I go to them and Jazz, and we were like talking about titles, and Matthew sent that book, and we were talking about that moment, and it really felt like that because of the election, because we were going to find out. And the night of the opening of the show, we found out that Biden won. Everyone's like,
There they are, actually. No, it's true. When you look at them, and I didn't see them when you first showed them at Mariam Goodman's gallery in New York, the full suite of paintings, but when we were installing them here, I remember being struck one day. I was standing there with Damien Young, who's the sort of chief studio manager of Julie's, who's also here with us, been here with us this evening, and just saying, oh my God, I am seeing that movement that's going. There's movement within the paintings, but it also moves across them. Yeah. And somehow everything was unanchored relative to, say, even paintings like Mombophilia and the homage to Okwi and Wizor, the black
Yeah.
monoliths. So there's a real shift, and there's a movement that we can see across the exhibition of the pictorial space, and those questions of shadows and bodies and light are very present throughout the show. But we can talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I thought maybe, because you're talking about the photographs and the way you use photographs, the way you're thinking about your paintings and the time in which you're making them, it's all very important, but it would be really helpful for everyone and interesting for everyone to hear a little bit more about how you actually go about making a painting. I mean, what's involved? Because you work in a studio, you work very collaboratively, they're very actually complex things to create, as we understand it, multiple layers, there are a lot of choices that you're making. Yeah. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, through the years, the process has evolved and changed and really changes according to the body of work or the cycle of paintings we're working on. But the studio, what happens generally is we're working in a way where, because so much of the process that happens in the studio, the processes take time and are time consuming, kind of have to work ahead of the curve. So I have, these paintings, the studio had been working on them for the past year. I really, with the paintings that I completed for here, the 9 new paintings, I started working on those at a much later than when the studio had begun those. So usually there's these, so I'm basically I'm always a little bit behind time, which is kind of interesting because I'm using media as part of the points of departure for these paintings. And that's only really, at least the way I'm working with it right now, the blurred images and the blurred photography become the social ground in the paintings, and as such kind of a point of departure for me. And that's really just provides a point of entry. I have worked on paintings that don't have any images or blurred images or anything underneath them, like the black paintings that are in the show, the Feminine in 9, or the cycle of gray paintings I made before 2018. But I think with these, it's really a process of certain photographs that really come to the fore of the mind. And this one, for example, is a wildfire in California. You have them here. We know what those look like in the news, and we know how devastating these events are. And so but there's many complexities around each of these images, and so you don't need to know that that's a wildfire to get the sense or visceral kind of idea of experiential feeling of something being incinerated, but also kind of being that comes through in the palpable way of the painting. And so with the photography, I choose a photograph, whatever it is, like that, or the Rally to the Rights in Charlottesville, and I during the early Trump years, and one of the earliest paintings in this show, take that and I blur that image. And what happens when you blur the image? It's just like you just get the ghosts, and I became interested in that, especially if you turn the image into black and white, and then it feels like light and shadow and some other form of haunting that I'm responding to in the painting, and that I think builds up to the next stage. Damien Young, who's here with us and who has an incredible hand, has been with me 20 years in the studio, almost 20, has really developed the technique of painting these blurred images. At the beginning, they felt very kind of, they almost felt viscous and solid, almost like a lava lamp kind of thing, and we didn't want that kind of, I really wanted them to feel like a haze or like immaterial blur. So when you come up to them, your eye really can't locate itself. And when we're taking photos of them in the studio, the iPhone can't focus on them all the time, So that indeterminate space of the photo and what happens in paint and materially is what I'm really, really interested in. So Damien, usually I give a file to Damien, and Damien paints with the acrylic, with airbrush, paints the first layer, which is the blurred image. And then the studio, we have another group of the team that are working on the surfaces of the pieces, and then apply this surface. Usually it's like 50 coats of this acrylic molding paste, like golden molding paste, and sometimes that's thinned out, sometimes it's thicker, and then that's scraped onto the paintings in very, very thin veils, and then sanded, wet sandpaper in between those. And then that builds up this surface that can be painted on, erased, masked on, cut. There's a lot we can do on that and play with that. And so I used to work on that. I made that surface to work on it with ink, and I've made the surface more absorbent at times and more more reflective at times, depending on what the material is, but that's general. And then I'm working in it with either ink or acrylic inks, acrylic paint, airbrush, screen print. I take photographs of the painting, put it back into Photoshop, and then I'm working at full scale in the computer on the painting, and then we make screens of those Photoshop airbrush paintings or spray paint or whatever, and then those get printed onto the painting, and then it goes back and I paint back into it. So it's this process of moving back and forth between these three different forms of making. Yeah. But I think mine and Damien's place in that is where you have the point of departure, and then where you have the kind of the more loose painting is coming from that.
Well, it's interesting to hear you talk about, and we know clearly now that you work with contemporary media, like digital photography, projections, but you work, my understanding is you work with these forms of media as just one example within a very long history of indexical mark making, right? Mm-hmm. So even, I was speaking with Damien the other night, even you look at some of the paintings, like the Black Monolith or Indigène Origine Ouverture, you get the sense that you're seeing pixel marks, even in Harker, I think. But they're not really pixel marks, they're rendered as pixelated marks. So it's almost like a language of mark making, which goes from this very, very simple, even handprints, the first marks, the first indication of we are here, I am here, through to something like a pixelated mark. Yeah. Could you say something about your interest in that kind of these histories of mark making and as they relate to histories of abstraction?
Yeah, I think we're all immersed in and informed by the visualities of our world, whatever that is, and the longer the longer we're here and the more we study and the further we evolve, that just gets richer and richer and richer. And so, yeah, some of the earliest marks are the sprayed dot or the sprayed the hand print itself, but also the kind of silhouette of the hand. Some of these are the earliest marks that we have, and we've been doing this as humans for thousands, tens of thousands of years, thousands and thousands. I mean, they saw them. I think the oldest drawn mark that we have is in the Bulbous Caves in South Africa, like 70-something thousand years ago. So really, this has been happening for so long. And I think all of that language is part of our visuality, from the typed word to the different kind of graphics we're informed by, to different forms of dance and expression that are embodied and then also that are fully abstract. And we have this lexicon to pull from. I think for me, one of the ways that I've been interested in this, in first just the history of painting and studying painting, and I've traveled to see painting, and it's very important to me. But the way that I think, what I've become interested in is how the marks, as you put them together, they become something else. So you can pull from a certain form of a stroke and something like an ancient handprint, but it can also reference Hammond's or John's or Kusama or Pierre Huy. You can go through this, and then each of those, if you do a mark that looks a little bit like an outline or a silhouette, it could be a little shout out to Kerouac, and then it morphs into something that becomes like, I don't know, Stella. Like, you can really play with this, but what happens is there's this, in my mind, this visual neologisms that are being created, and we create neologisms for when the language that we have is not enough for what we're trying to deal with, or when the language doesn't suffice, and then, and so a lot of times it's cultures that are important and central, but like pushed into the periphery somehow, claiming space and building a new form of language for this culture. And I think of playing with abstraction as that, like as a way to play with building new language from all of this historic language, and this kind of constantly mushing and layering and repurposing, sampling, mixing, what do they say? Chop and screwing things together in that way. And I think that's part of like what I think contemporary painting is doing. Like not just my work, but many contemporary artists, that's kind of there's this lexicon that we pull from, and it's all part of our language, our collective language.
And from that collective language, you're also proposing possibility, right? So you've talked about abstraction as a possibility for world building, but also this idea of it reinforcing the right to opacity, that not everything should be legible, not everything can be explained, not everything can be and crucially, not everything can actually be said or spoken, or truly communicate the reality of what it is, be it as a history and as a present thing.
Yeah, I mean, how many of us know people in our families who've had some kind of really lived through some form of deep trauma and can't talk about it? How many, how we know these stories, whether they're survivors of the Holocaust, whether they're survivors of displacement or, some abuse. There's all of, this is, and yet there's this continuity and this desire and insistence on on finding a way to invent and live with a certain kind of joy despite all of that. And I think it's that desire and knowledge of that, and knowledge of this innate kind of internal knowledge of our own reason to exist, meaning our capability of understanding why we enjoy the sunset, or why we like to move in the way we like to move, and how we achieve these states of this kind of transcendence in a way at the same time as we're experiencing life and all of its complexities. And so it's in that space, right, that I think where art is vital, and I mean all forms of art, and creativity is vital, where the creative imagination, where the imagination is crucial, and where the imagination can provide new possibilities, and invent new ways of being able to just not only reflect and digest and contemplate something, but also to offer a different proposition, even if it's just in the experience with the work of art by itself at that moment, and it's as fleeting as that, like listening to an incredible concert.
Yeah. Well, you were sort of talking earlier about, what happens when you start, making marks and drawing, as sort of a kind of improvisation, but also a capturing of many different languages within abstraction that can come from anywhere. But it reminds me of music and the composition of music. And I know music, sort of musical composition, is of great interest to you. You love music. You also admire a number of really important composers. And indeed, the cycle in the exhibition, Feminine in 9, the cycle of black, we call them the black paintings, 9 black paintings, which are brought together here. They were first shown in London at White Cube in Bermondsey this time last year, or October last year, and they've been held together before they go to their many different collectors for this exhibition. So it really is possibly the last opportunity in our lifetime when you'll get to see them all together. But you actually conceived of them as a kind of composition, pictorially and in time and in space. Could you say something?
Well, yeah, after I made the first one, and the first one was kind of an experiment, I was with Jessica and the children of a spring break trip. We were in Utah hiking, and there are these red mountains and rocks we were hiking on, and there were these striations of like white. It almost looked like spray paint right through the rock. And I don't know, something about that got stuck in my head. I don't know how red and white translated to black and white, but that's what in the process. And then I was so we prepared some surfaces in the studio. I just was interested in what happens if the reverse approach of working with black on a light ground could be what would happen working with white and silver on these black paintings. But also, I was in Athens right before, I worked on the first painting in Tacita Dean's studio in Berlin, and I was in Athens that summer beforehand, and that little church, I forgot what it was called, in Athens, inside, it's like a little really old Coptic church. It's inside of that big building. It's a big modernist 70s kind of international style building. And inside that church, there are these really old frescoes that are all black now, and the only thing you can see are the metallic halos and stuff that were left behind, and some of the kind of sculptural element of how those paintings were made. And somehow that also got lodged in my mind. So those two things, like I started to make one, and I accidentally bought this flip-flop ink without knowing it, this silver violet ink that's an interference color, thinking it was silver ink. And the first time I used it, I was just like, what the hell? Why is this purple and green and not? And then And then I became more and more interested in it, and the next bottle didn't do that, and I was totally confused. And then later on, like literally weeks later, I was working with my glasses on finally, my reading glasses, and I realized there's a reason these bottles, the ink changes, like they're different inks. At the first, I thought it was this, mistake, and therefore, I don't know what it was. And so that became, when I really realized that you could push that in the paintings, as that was happening, and I was working on 2, I called the studio in New York and asked them to prepare another 7 panels, and then made this cycle of 9 paintings. And it was really because those paintings, how they were materializing, wasn't like other paintings I had made, and I didn't know what they were going to be like. So they really became this exploration, and making the rest of them. When I worked on them, I really wanted to maybe keep them all together. Like I kept moving them around in the studio. By the end, I was working on 3 at a time, and then I worked on all of them, and then So there was this. So then they found their order in the studio, and they really felt to me. I went to see the Eastman piece being performed at the 92nd Street Y, Feminine in 9 by Julie Eastman, which is this incredible piece, and it was done by Wild Up and Adam Tindler and what's his name? Blood Orange, Devon. Yeah, thank you. And they were performing it, and it was incredible. And sonically, kept hearing that in the studio when I was back, and I played it again. But the sound from the beginning, from the bells all the way through, the speed at which some of those pianos they're playing with one another, and what happens in that music and is like, for me, these paintings just had the relationship to that, and that's why I titled them after that. But they feel to me like, they reminded me of Xenakis drawings and Xenakis scores and the Greek composer, and I don't know, they just feel they had that energy to them. But they also are very, very, very spatial. They feel like a life cycle somehow within them. And I was interested in both those aspects of what the paint could do by itself in this materiality and how that exists. And thank God for that flip-flop ink. Silver violet.
Well, we would love, actually, I'm just going to do a little, you've just given me an opportunity here, but one of the things Julie and I are talking about, we'd very much like to do, is to be able to bring out to Australia some musicians to perform that Julius Eastman score in the space.
It would be so great in Feminine.
But if anybody wants to support us in that endeavour, please come and see me after the talk.
You'll never forget the experience.
But you talked about the very physical and bodily, and the paintings that they do shift. And as you move in front of them, because of that ink as well, the colours and the tonalities of those metallic inks shift. So at one point you're looking, it's like purple, and when the sunlight that's coming in, the daylight that comes into the museum hits them, it's purple. But then you move to one side and they become green. So it sort of reinforces this very physical sense that all your paintings have. Anyway, when when you're standing in front of one of your paintings,
there's a performativity to actually viewing them, and almost like and in a sense, I meant to say this. It wasn't just this, oh wow, for the silver violet, but what I was really interested in, I was also about to begin the trans paintings, and we were in the studio exploring how to work with the trans paintings and how to develop that material. And what I loved is the subjectivity of viewing these paintings, and that they're only it really is determined by your experience with it, with the light, how you move about it, that you actually see the painting, and it changes, and it's constantly in that state of flux, and that indeterminate way of experiencing something, but then it is activated by you engaged in with it, is what I also was like super interested in, because of the kind of possibility of what happens with light and the body.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the trans paintings, of course, this idea of performativity, but I also think, and the spatial, this idea of the paintings occupying space. Well, that's later, that's Le Mans. I don't know, that's coming up at the end. You'll hear about this later. I'm being distracted. Where were we? Performativity, the body, in the brow.
How did that get in there?
Is that stuck? Is that stuck, or is it going to keep on moving?
Move on.
Christian, if you're up there, can you move the image? Okay. He's probably working on it.
That's
So
okay, that's okay.
just stay cool. So the trans paintings move. paintings occupying three-dimensional space. Sorry, it's the time. Tell us about the trans paintings. I mean, you created them, obviously.
Yeah.
They've come out of all of this work that you've been doing and this thinking about performativity. You talked about the shadow earlier. You're talking about embodiment, about bodies, about the sort of the performativity of making the work, the performativity of viewing it, but also this idea of light and shadow and ghosts and haunting.
Yeah, so about the space for half an hour paintings, those blurred paintings that you first encounter in the first gallery in the main area, those paintings, when I was working on them and when I was installing them in the gallery in Marion Goodman in New York, I was really struck with how my shadow, as I was working on them, I couldn't, sometimes I'd have to get out of the way to really see what was happening in the painting. And that became something that I kept thinking about when I would sleep or wake up in the morning, and it kept coming back to me, this idea of like how the shadow then does something else inside of this painting of shadows and light. And then how does it feel like, some of the paintings and the prints really feel like they're emitting light from within them and the way that they're painted. And so that became, so if not just that they are illuminated, but they become this kind of source of that, then I became interested in what happens in that indeterminate space between that. Like, if one is looking at the painting and is constantly in this state of flux, and you're looking at it from different angles to really understand it, and then people walk behind it and the shadows merge within the shadows of the actual blur, they become animated in a very different way. And the shadow, or the sense of a shadow, was that a shadow? Those kinds of things become really interesting and fleeting. And it's something about the fleetingness of that and the kind of experientialness of that I think activates something really kind of viscerally profound, at least for me. And then also that aspect of the paintings kind of emitting light to one another. And I think we play with that in the installation, how they respond to each other in terms of their own internal sources of light, and then how they respond to each other in terms of how they stand in the space. Yeah. And they're supported by Nairi's sculptures, the upright brackets. And those really, they're clamping the paintings, they're presenting the paintings, they're showing the paintings, they like have them in this structure. They're like, in a sense, forced to stand there, right? Like they're being held. That's what I mean. Like, and so it plays with this space between this space of agency and free and individual, that sense of agency, and then this kind of aspect of being presented, like what we do with our shy children.
And they're definitely like protagonists, but they also they do change with the light, and we have a kind of clear story up above those two double height galleries, and so we raise the blinds to allow the maximum amount of daylight to be able to come in when it's not a day like today. And you really do, depending on the time of day, what you see in those paintings is quite different, and they really are incredibly dynamic and in movement visually.
They completely change in different lighting environments.
And you see different colours and different...
so I have to move through the studio always when I'm working on them, so they're not just in one place. They have to face the windows, to be in the dark, so I could see them in different areas. And that's really the other thing that I became really interested in with this show, is finishing the work, was that the big night scene painting, the trans painting that's in the middle of the last room, that really was made in all these different environments, and it really is a different painting in every single environment. So that, I think, became something I'm really interested in now, is how to further interrogate that myself, or explore that.
You've studied all types of painting, including Old Master painting. I know Rembrandt is a great sort of favourite of yours, Titian, Caravaggio. But you just said night scene. It's the first time I've heard you say that.
Night scene.
Night scene, but of course it makes me think of Rembrandt's The Night Watch. Yeah. And it's quite a similar format and quite similar scale, but you weren't thinking about that.
Not at all. Not at all.
Just occurred to me. Well, but when you look at the trans paintings, there's one...
That's one of my favorite all-time paintings that if you really stay in front of it for a long time, it will actually change, like actually start to move. And like you see hands coming forward in space.
Yeah.
You see a shadow of the hand across the guy's crotch. Like things start to happen that you just don't expect Rembrandt to be doing, and it's phenomenal.
Rijksmuseum Amsterdam.
Yeah, spend time in front of that.
Well, so you mentioned Nairi and working with the sculptor Nairi Bagramian on the sculptures that support these trans paintings, and you talked earlier, or Lamia introduced your exhibition at Palazzo Grassi Ensemble, where you really sort of introduce a cast of artists who've been incredibly important to you and part of an ongoing conversation throughout your career as an artist. But collaboration is something that also defines who you are as an artist. You've talked about your processes and the way you work in the studio, so many people important to you. Similarly with Denniston Hill and the project there. So these conversations are ongoing. And so the conversations with artists and with art making over time, but also with artists very much in the present. And one of those sort of collaborations or conversations that's very important to you is with the printmakers at Gemini Studios. And we have Case Hudson here. We're very honoured to have the master printer for Gemini Studios, GEL, in LA, who came to attend Julie's opening, but who has been working with Julie for now, how many years?
17 years.
17 years. And so producing all of the etchings that you see and the monumental etchings that you see in the exhibition were actually produced and printed by Case there.
And the last 4 they pushed really hard to get them printed for this show.
Yeah.
So thank you, Case.
So could you say just a little bit about that, your work with Gemini and work with etching?
Working with, it's like finding, like, I think the analogy is like in music. You know, like you see musicians that are constantly just inventing their own thing, right? But then you have like, at least in hip hop, you have this conversation with a producer. You go into a producer's studio and it's a very, very different environment, atmosphere, what you are eating for lunch and what you do to start the day, and all that changes from when you go to different people's studios. And going to the print shop at Gemini is like one of those experiences. You're going in, the room's cleared out, other artists have been there, they've been working on their things, and then they just totally invent a way for each of us to get lost in an exploration, whatever that might be. But it's really an exploration of and a collaboration with their possibilities, their technical capabilities and prowess, but also their inventions. And so it's that, I mean, to me, it really feels, it's like that kind of an experience where you're recording a track, but then that track is going to get completely chopped up or changed or, repeated or whatever, and the beat will do something else behind it. And I think it's really that kind of a relationship working with a master printer. And Case is a magician, not just like, I mean, I don't know how they're able to get the color to really feel like a light inside coming off the paper, but it's incredible, and I just feel really grateful and fortunate to have had this time working with you.
It's worth pointing out for people in the audience that some of those prints have up to, 60 colors? 62 inks, more color, because they're mixed and they're hand mixed, and then there are multiple plates that are involved, up to 20 plates, I think. So it's an extraordinary process, and it's incredibly creative and technically complex and masterful to arrive at the results that we have.
The thing is that being able to take something apart. In the studio, when you're working on a drawing or on a painting, like a drawing can happen really quickly. You can cut it up, you can do things like that. You can erase it, or like maybe. But with printmaking, you can take those same marks and do a number of things with them. You can make them disappear completely. You can change the color of them. You can put them in reverse order. So it really is this opportunity to take something and like do something else with it completely. And that's really been the bridge between bodies of work, like new invention coming from the collaboration and discourse with the printer, that pushing to something else then invents something else that might be explored in the painting. So it's this cyclical way of working. But I also want to say the show Ensemble and the idea of collaboration and conversation, we're all doing that all the time. It's how artists have constantly made and have been in conversation with one another, at least in the last, in the last, yeah. But I think it's really the conversation, working to study under somebody, but also really to learn from each other and build and push what might happen and invent stuff together or not. And I think this is something that we're always working within this collaborative context. None of us are working individually. I was thinking of the group of friends that are here from Melbourne. All of these friends that have known each other for so long since they were young, and they're all immersed in one way or another in this creative invention somehow. And it's kind of amazing that, like, the kids who just met each other and, primary school, not primary school, secondary school, and then whatever you call it, university, uni.
Uni. Well, probably just my last question then, because I realise we've been going for nearly an hour, but sort of follows on from there. But as we sit here, and I'm aware that your show at Palazzo Grassi, it will close at the end of January, I believe.
Beginning.
Yeah, the Obama Presidential Center Commission has just opened, so that was this year. We've just opened the exhibition here at the MCA. And you also completed, after much asking, I understand, or almost begging on the part of BMW, the 20th art car, which is why that picture was there, for BMW. But out of that project, so the art car has been launched, it was launched in Le Mans. The whole idea is what BMW have been doing for the past 20 plus years is commissioning amazing contemporary artists to create designs for their race cars.
Almost 50 years, more than 50 years.
Oh, is it 50? But you're only...
Since 76, almost 50.
Okay, thank you. But they're Formula One cars, and they race the Le Mans, and so you were at Le Mans for the opening of the...
Suzanne doesn't know about racing. Formula One doesn't race in Le Mans.
Oh, no. It's a race car, whatever.
I didn't know anything either.
Okay. But you like race
but
cars.
I love that, yeah. But it's so Le Mans is like, yeah. Well, no, I didn't really like... I love that. No, so I didn't want to do, but the car became something when it was something that grew out of also the pandemic. I had said no a couple times before that, was invited in 2018. And then during pandemic, I got a photograph of the jury by Thomas, who's leading the project there. And he sent me, and there was a photograph of Okwi. And I really, he was part of the jury, and I really missed
Okwi and Wizo.
Okwi and Wizo, yeah. And I really missed his presence in the world at that time. Like, I thought, sometimes we were all checking in with each other, trying to make sense of that time and that moment. And he would have been such an interesting perspective. And I was thinking about that, but he would have also taken that opportunity as a space to explore something else. And then I thought, why can't I think about this art car project as a different type of possibility? And that's where we came up with, through reimagining Denniston Hill, reimagining what an art car project could be. Then the car became this prototype to race in Le Mans. The hypercars, they called them, they're hybrid vehicles, the first hybrid vehicles that were racing the 24-hour race. So Le Mans is a 24-hour race. I'm not even sure what Formula One is. I don't know if they're also 24 hours, but I know that the Formula One car is you sit in the center, and Le Mans is supposed to be a traditional two-person race car, although there is no room for another person in there, but that's how they're set up. And there's a team of 4 drivers, and they race this crazy race for 24 hours. And so they've in the past, there was other artists who they've had do these cars, and then the actual car with the art, the painted car does this race, and then the BMW keeps it. They're producing, and the reason I did this is also it was actually thrilling. Whoever knew painting a car could be thrilling, although it's not painted at all. But I was able to start to play with the project as something else and use it as a different kind of playground for the imaginatory, right? Like, really be able to just pretend the car was like, this going through a painting and the painting transforms the car. That's kind of the way I was thinking about that project. But what came out of that is the Media Studies project, which we've been interested in at Denniston Hill, called the Exodus Media Workshop. We decided to try to build a project like that and ask BMW to produce it across the continent of Africa. So it'll start in Senegal. It's starting this January. It's being kicked off in Cape Verde with the African Film Archive and the first Pan-African meeting on the continent. And then we'll have a workshop led by different leading filmmakers and artists in each of these countries: Senegal, Morocco, Nairobi, Kenya, and then Nigeria, Lagos, Nigeria, and then it'll culminate in South Africa at the Zeitz Museum in Cape Town. But these different, and we will also lead a workshop there. And so each of these places will be, different people, like Autolith Group, or like Mati Diop has been invited. These are the people that we're thinking about, and if you haven't seen her most recent film, Dahomey, I can't recommend it enough. It's an incredible work of art. But there have been, the continent needs this kind of infrastructure, just getting people in the room and being able to talk together. And these workshops will be with 15 local to kind of close by. It doesn't have to be from the city, but from the region. What's the word I'm looking for? But working on, we'll pull these artists, with local organizations to kind of find 15 participants to work with these lead artists and really interrogate how we deal with this mediated environment we're in and how we invent and claim that for ourselves. And just getting people in the room to have these conversations and what can be made together, that's what BMW is funding. And then hopefully they'll leave some form of an infrastructure for that to become a kind of biennial project, biennial kind of project, or a project that happens every 4 years. But this kind of symposium for the study of ourselves. That's kind of the idea of it. So there are these two sides to the project, but that part was really inspired by that photo of Okwe. Sorry, that was a very circuitous way to get somewhere.
I wanted you to talk about that, and I think everyone would sort of appreciate that's a perfect example of world building, actually, that you've undertaken and coming from your painting. Just before we close, I was reminded, we're sitting here with a book. We produced a book, publication to accompany the exhibition. We're very proud of this book, designed by Daniel New and published by the MCA. And we have Hydrocans as co-publishers, so it gets out there everywhere else in the world. But it reproduces all of the works that are in this exhibition. There's some new texts in it, including writings by Julie herself, and a wonderful timeline, sort of history and Julie's chronology. So we encourage you to look at it and to take one home with you. We've only just printed it because we were having to photograph 13 works, the 4 new prints, Stages of Uprising, the monumental etchings, as well as 9 new paintings in the studio, and we were doing a very fast job with them being photographed in New York before everything would be collected to be transported to Australia, getting them to our designer to lay them out, get them to the printer. So we've received a small batch of the books. Some are on sale in the store, but we're also taking orders, and more will be here soon. But we're really, really pleased with the book, and we think that it's a book that you'll all enjoy and appreciate, give you a lot more insights. But with that, I would just like to ask you to join me in thanking Julie for her generosity.
Thank you all. Thank you.
In her exhibition. Thank you.